I have a background in marketing, communication, branding, strategy. I worked in industry and in communication, marketing communication agencies. And I shifted to change management, organizational change, and increasingly interested in social networks, in social change, in movement in general. I tried to look at what types of strategies could be used to affect change best. And it led me to study all kinds of things, and in particular patterns, as I consider it's probably a federative and tool or unit of cognitive processing. And I'll be starting a PhD in early 2017 at the University of Hull in the UK, based on this topic. So what are we going to look at today? We are going to look at the challenges of complexity and the types of responses from a systemic and agency perspective, trying to build some outlines of a theory. And then we're going to look at how the concept of pattern can provide some interesting mediating and connective functions to be operationalized at the service of the global brain and systemic literacy. And then my objective here is to gather some input for my PhD and to see how it can complement, how my research can benefit the global brain, and how the global brain can institute and work with research can complement my own research, and see how we can establish some loose or collaborations for the future. So, well, we live in an increasingly complex world. Detail complexity is growing. More parts, more movement, more increasing number of variables, and in every domain, the number of symbols and signals and cues and knowledge is increasing at a pace where we cannot easily integrate it. This is the picture. Is the wiring, the circuitry of a Airbus A380. you can imagine how the whole, how do you say, float, the whole network of airplanes with air traffic can be in terms of complexity in detail. But this is manageable by computers. It's just a question of computational force, capacity. We also have, and that's more problematic, increasing dynamic complexity. And this means more interactions between a greater variety of factors, more things in interaction that aggregate at levels that are not necessarily the levels where causes can be found. This schema is the counterinsurgency dynamic in Afghanistan in the beginning of the mid-years 2000. Well, there are probably lots of things missing in there, but where are the leverage points? And that was a kind of a joke that was circulating in the systems thinking community about, well, how do you want us to solve this issue? But of course there are other types of systems involved. So the complexity comes from a whole range of systems that are in interaction. You have physical systems, you have biological systems, you have social systems, and different forms of organizations which generate different types of behaviors. But there's something missing in here, and what's missing is agency. Systems interact with different degrees of agency, and I consider here agency as the capacity to effect, so the capacity to change, to act within a system, to change it, and to produce and to change a trajectory. So it's about choice and decision. So we're basically talking about the mind here. So Akoff and Garage Dagi wrote a paper on the different types of systems and different types of systems models. You have the deterministic systems, and they defined it, by the degree of agency or choice that the parts display and what the systems display, the capacity of choice as a whole. So the deterministic system has no agency in its parts and no agency as a whole. So it's the clock, the mechanic system. They put the computer in there. We can ask ourselves the question whether the computer is or not a deterministic machine, but that's not the topic here. Then you have animate systems. So there's one mind here. The parts, like a human being, you have the breathing system, the digestive system, the cognitive system. They don't have agencies as parts, but all together, the human being as a whole has a capacity of choice. And then you get to social systems, and social systems have are multi-minded. They are composed of parts that have some agency, that can demonstrate a choice, and they can have a choice as a whole. That's your paper, Marta, on how, and also Victoras, that the system has a cognitive, the social system has is a cognitive individual and may have a different effect and agency and cognitive impact than the humans that compose it. And all these different systems that we saw before and here interact as socio-technological systems and socio-environmental systems, hybrid systems, where the parts may have a choice, but the whole does not have a choice. And this is where complexity emerges. So there's a problem, and there's lots of literature on that, that when a system of a certain type is managed or considered with a model of another type, many people talk about the difficulty of approaching complex systems like a machine or a mechanic system. And another discussion to have is how technologies are actually hybridizing both constructed systems and animate systems as increasingly hybrid, but that's not the topic of the discussion here. So within these systems, you have a variety of generative processes that are involved. And it's important to be able to try and distinguish them, because you have construction processes where you apply work to build things step by step with a direct effect. You have development processes where you actually work on the capabilities and the conditions so that the system can evolve and develop on its own. So it's realize its potentials. You have autopoietic systems where the system regenerates itself and regenerates its properties and its own organization, like ecological or living systems. You have emergence, which are unexpected effects of interactions that could not be prefigured by looking at the individual behaviors of each system taken separately. So in physics, chemistry, you have the wetness of H2O, but in terms of complex systems, when the interests of a system comes in conflict with the interest of another system, you can generate a whole different types of effects. The work of Francis on the medium taking control over the individual systems is typically an emergent result of systems in interaction. And you have evolution, which is the transformation of a system under all these processes playing together. And there may be other types of processes, but it gives an idea that we're not looking necessarily at the same type of thing. So different types of aggregated effects, here are a few examples, but patterns of behavior, they leave tracks, information in the environment. So whether it's body liquids or the tracks in a campus, typical example in the stigmergy field, and or social networks, for example, but you can have several types of different tracks. They're invisible to start with, but then they can appear at tipping points all of a sudden, at more or less rapid paces. So for example, ideas that are in the air, and all of a sudden everybody is working and coming up with the same type of innovation. But you can also have, a climate, a storm is electricity or is static that accumulates. This in the latter is the reaching or bursting of the US debt ceiling. So it can produce some very spectacular effects, but some that accumulate and make some irreversible changes, like the Earth boundaries here in very long phases, or the increase of a population that cannot be followed and seen step by step, or the story of the frog, that if you put it in cold water and if you put it in boiling water, it jumps out and it's saved. If you put it in cold water and you start boiling the water, the frog doesn't realize what's going on. So when it becomes visible, it can create all kinds of possibilities and ideas, and we've been talking and hearing a lot about that in the recent weeks, It can enclose people in filter bubbles where the same information is fed and fed back, and there's no diversity here. Or it can force people into normative structures. Once you have built your highways, you can't take another route. Or it can lead everybody down the cliff, or it can create booms or busts like we saw with the financial crisis. So the system may take control and influence and drive the actors. So there's the diversity and choice that's reduced, and agency is not being able to kick in at its full potential. And these are things that need to be tracked and identified if we look at human action and the capacity for social systems to change. So wicked problems in this context emerges within complex systems, and they're complex systems themselves. It means that they are non-linear, they have non-linear causes or multiple factors of different types that interact with one another of different nature. You can have physical factors, biological factors, psychocognitive, internal cognitive factors, or cultural and social factors. They manifest at different levels and scales, so the data is distributed in the system. They have multiple rhythms and paces, and structures and behaviors evolve in time, so there's no stable state. You take a picture at one moment, and then you look at it in the next moment, the picture has changed. So what does it mean in terms of problem solving? It means that information and the signals that we need to act upon are totally distributed in the system, that we can't act from a higher order to encompass the totality, because we're one of the points here trying to solve the problem. There's no history or best practice. We need to do as we go, experiment, trial and error. We can't make clinical tests, because then the effect is there and we can't go back. And there's a huge difficulty to formulate or articulate the actual problems, because people don't speak the same language and are not looking at things from the same perspective. So there's also no right or wrong, because things can be good seen from one angle and not good seen, or good from two different angles that are contradictory. So you may have to have trade-offs. So actually, well, it's open and it's all distributed, but it looks a bit like a ball of hair that you need to unpack to understand what's going on. And the difficulty here is that you have a very big interdependence of factors and variables of different nature that people tend to conflate and confuse, and they don't know that people don't really realize or have or not conscious that one is speaking from one type of angle and use one type of factors, and others are speaking from other types of factors. So the responses: social systems form around what we could call social objects. It's the object that attracts them to share an activity together. It's really taking the simple, let's say, approach. And they actually, so it can be scientific, political, religious, and people can belong to different social systems. And
by object, do you mean like a thing, or do you mean like a subject of attention?
Well, it's an object. Well, it's more of a subject of attention, actually.
That's what I.
But
because
it's
in French, objet.
Yes,
more often used in that
I'm
sense.
using it in the two ways, because when let's say science look at the matter as the object, actually. So let's say that it's the thing, but it's also the matter, and it's also the processes through which the objects are transformed, for example. So within their social environment, or this cluster of well, this social system, or let's say within this attractor that creates a cluster of agents in activity, there's a search for efficiency in resource allocations, and usually when people gather together, they try to optimize their resources, and so they try to process whatever information or they have or knowledge they produce in order to be the most effective, and they need, because of this increase in the detail, need to specialize in order to be able to be effective and efficient in their own domain. But at the same time, knowledge, culture, language becomes increasingly specialized and focused also on this triptych of the social object and the language and culture that's developed around it. And so there's a paradox that there's agency that is distributed with an increasing variety, but too much focused to be able to cross over and communicate and have collectively or taken together a coherent action. So there's an increasing number of logics of action or forms of agency, and it's hard to integrate, and so it's an impediment to collaboration and to transdisciplinary action.
What means an impediment?
Oh, it's something, un empêchement, enfin hindrance, an obstacle, sorry, yes. Okay. Although people want to cooperate because they are enclosed, let's say, in their own bubbles, they have difficulties to federate their diversity. So we have paradoxically this type of response structure, because agency is distributed and highly fragmented. So we have local efficiency without global coherence. So I've tried to look at agency from a multifaceted perspective. And actually the hunch or the direction that I'd like to research a little bit more is that agency is the result of individuation and co-individuation processes of the parts of social systems and of the social system as a whole. That is the result of the interaction between the object of focus and action, the internal drivers and the cognitive characteristics of the people who gather, or the agents who gather together around this social object with a kind of meta-stabilization of their values and shared values, let's say, and ways of thinking about things, and the expressions and the relationships that they have among each other. And so it's a constant dialogue and multidimensional feedback that I don't know how to deal with currently, between the matter and the object that can be seen as an object or seen as a matter, and the cognitive elements and the social elements. And to make things even easier, well, within these internal and cognitive drivers, you have groups or social systems that are more directed towards personal development and cognitive causes, let's say, because you can imagine that the social object is a cause that people adhere to or choose to build an activity around. And others are object-oriental. Let's look at climate change. And the psychological ones will say, let's look at why people believe in climate change or don't believe in climate change. And then you have the socially directed ones that are about all the political issues, for example, that are around, or the way that people don't have the same language. This is why we can't solve the problem. But these differences are more epistemological than ontological. It's about different really ways and frameworks to see things. And so it's not just a question of language or finding better truths or better facts to argument on a subject or on an object, or to look at the object but there are different objective truths, and this individuation and co-individuation process in this around this agency triad, let's say, is the actual challenge for understanding and alignment around shared visions and pathways, although people really want to align and collaborate, but the problem is that agency and action logics that drive people and all the expressions and signs that they develop around it are not interchangeable, and people want to remain effective. So I like this analogy of the swarm, because many times you hear, but look at murmurations and swarms. Oh, they have simple rules, and there's a wonderful complex adaptive behavior that emerges, and everybody is in synchrony and everybody goes in the same direction. So, okay, separation, don't bump into your neighbor. Alignment, try and steer towards the same direction and steer to move towards your flock mates. But this actually works and is what is sought out within social systems around this agency triads. If you look at, for example, an organization, well, all the work on corporate culture will be based on building this alignment and on building the brand and the internal brand and the external brand in order to demonstrate and generate this cohesiveness. But if you want to cross boundaries, you can't really have this type of alignment, because your drivers and your means of expression can't enable that for the moment. So agency and connectivity, you do have some overlap. So people share the same social object, people share the same values, or they share the same language, and they can align on one or two or the three, and be cohesive on one or two or the three. But these are usually implicit connections. and it's difficult to make them explicit, and they're dealt with usually horizontally or vertically. I'll go more on this a little bit later, but as a whole, you don't have a network, you don't have a degree of network agency to match the connected factors and causes of the problems that we are trying to solve, and so the whole issue is to try and see how we can optimize and tap into the diversity and the potential of this distributed agency. And it's good that it's distributed and people do things and think things and take care of different things in a diverse ecosystem, actually. So, as a result, well, to deal with that, we have this, where we should have that. So how do we build that? So that's where, I'm not yet here, but that's where patterns can help. So at best, you have connectivity existing within domains of science, or between them, or between, within domains. So you have the scientific domain or the object domain, and you can put lots of things there. You can put, hard, not natural sciences, but you also have the efficient causes, the material stuff, systems of causality. This is what system sciences is working on, trying to find bridges, or domains of hard sciences trying to find bridges. Also, you have in the mind cognitive area, people try and find responses and work across behavioral sciences, cognitive sciences, to understand what's happening in the mind of everybody. And so it's more about final causes, motivations, systems of inference. And you have the social layer, but it doesn't. It isn't made at the various levels of granularity to fit the actual situations and responses, or potential for responses at the various levels, to unpack the different and try and understand what's going on at the various levels. So what we actually need is new types of organs that can first help perceive and track what's going on within this little triad here, within a social system. Who are we? What's our how can we be more effective and better understand how we can have effects, or our own agency, thinking about the Sioux, looking for clues in their own environment, but also doing the same thing among different systems, different triads, different social systems, to be able to collaborate, compete, align or not, but in a way that is more consciously aware, and try to mediate and connect all these in a more, let's say, differentiated but yet connected and mediated way, to be able to navigate broader pictures of reality. So, well, I think the pattern is a good connector, because patterns are everywhere. So if you type pattern on Google, you have 1 billion entries. If you type economy, you have 700 million entries. If you type finance or another design thinking, you have, or design, you have 1.5 billion entries. So it's a huge volume of using the term patterns, but it's very, very fragmented and fractioned. Not two people have the same definition of the pattern, and they all, and when you speak,
it's one of those typical concepts that everybody knows, but there is
exactly.
probably is no Wikipedia article about it because there is no body of knowledge about which everybody
well, that's what
knows.
I'm going to. I'll be able to create a Wikipedia page on the pattern, but
I remember that I was hooked up. I wrote an article about the notion of adventure, and I discovered that there was no real page about adventure. Everybody knows adventure, but there is no definition or description or observation.
Well, I even sometimes talk to people, for example, in the pattern language community, or some people that deal with patterns, and they're saying, oh no, but these patterns are not good patterns, or they're not my patterns. So these are real patterns, but these are not real patterns. Well, yes, there's patterns everywhere. So let's try and see the richness and the variety of patterns, because, well, maybe pattern is an archetypal thing that is has multiple facets and that can help bridge different types of things. So, making the concept of patterns more explicit and more visible can maybe, just by making it visible, get people to think of what a pattern does and what it is useful for, and well, in my own triad of agency, what are my preferred patterns, and what patterns am I attracted to, and which ones can I put into play. So seeing it a potential as cue, as concept, or as artifact, and I'll examine quickly. I don't know what time it is, how much time I have left. Yeah, so I'll examine quickly patterns seen from all these different areas of semiotics, cybernetics, cognition, formalization, modeling design, and inquiry, participative inquiry. And looking at it from this perspective of the life cycle, both the triadic form of agency and the life cycle of action, from the perception to the action and the feedback of the action. Any question up to now? So the semiotic function, if we look at the pattern as the semiotic sign, and I'm looking at the Peircean semiotic triad, where the sign is at the same time an object or an elementary system under focus. It's the phenomenological, ontological form. This is what we have. It's the what, which is static, dynamic, could be relatively abstract still. And you have, and it should be the other way around, but it's never mind, the interpretant or understanding, the inference of it, the decoding of what what we are perceiving, or the stimulus is saying in our mind. And it's the third one is the sign vehicle that represents the way we represent this phenomenological object, which encodes it in relation to a context. And then we can imagine all the relations between these different, let's say, embodiments, or I don't know the best words, but the manifestations of the pattern.
Isn't the object also called denotatum?
Sorry?
In Peirce, is it object also called denotatum?
I don't know. I don't know.
Because I seem to remember interpretum, denotatum, and...
There was representamen, which is the sign vehicle, and object. I didn't come across that, but I haven't. Digging deeper is part of my 5-year PhD
But I
program.
was also wondering whether there is a relationship with Luhmann's
Yes, absolutely. It's like this is your sign, like signifier and signifier.
Yes.
Then Peirce adds this third one.
Yeah.
Putting it kind of dynamic, that it's happening, but it's more like a structure, you know. And
Yes.
then Luhmann puts it like, okay, the actions of making of those as a basic ontological element of social.
But I think that you can see these at the same time as static and as dynamic, and in their becoming. So
yeah. So like depending
yeah.
on what you.
So, and this is interesting because it kind of maps, and it was kind of, I didn't do it on purpose, but it kind of maps the triadic form of agency, and you have agency that actually determines or conditions the actual pattern, but this becomes, you can have, you have patterns of agency that become the patterns of a social system. But within this pattern of agency and pattern of the social system, well, you have patterns about the object, and you have patterns about the cognitive and the behaviors, and you have patterns that are created or modeled or decoded, encoded in connection to all this. So it's a rich concept that has different levels and different forms that are interesting to try and see what types and varieties of patterns there are, or we can find in an open way, and try to get some experience going on and some activity going on this. So you can imagine, and that was one of Soren's big point, because the same phenomenological objects can have multiple mental images or models, because similar mental models or similar object can have multiple representations, and because the same representation can have multiple interpretations, then you can imagine that these could be connected in multiple ways, and we could develop some tools and methods that can help create and form this network of meaning, and that can help mediate the different forms of agencies on their different facets in order to better make sense of the world around us. So I've tried to see how this could be put to work, and I've been reading interesting things about how cybernetics, you have the first order and you have a second order, but there are people that are unpacking the second order into third, fourth orders. So Maurice Yoll, for example, and Fink, and Anthony Judge also has done some work on that, and other people. We could imagine that the first order is it is, so we don't imagine that the first order is the study of the phenomenological object within its own referential, within its own framework, and so patterns can make domain-related knowledge within the aligned thing explicit, and help people align and be more cohesive within their domains of knowledge. And this is where pattern languages are right now. So here you are in the realm of the connecting the yellow together. I tried to have a red thread of the different colors and stuff. But then, so the second order is the lenses of observation. So this yellow thing, how do we interpret it? How do we infer it? How do we represent it? And how can we compare and confront our different means of interpretation, representation, etc. Then you have, and that's where I imagine maybe a third order, that is that when you start looking at yourself or the social system observing themselves, observing the object. Well, it changes the behaviors, and it changes some dynamics, and it can generate some aggregate behaviors that kind of are from the realm of the medium taking control of the behaviors of the individual agents, and patterns can help identify the tracks, the nature of that, the tracks of that. So I read an interesting article.
Why is it a third order dynamics?
Because it's not about object, it's not about the lens, it's not about the observer, but it's more about the dynamics unleashed by the observation. So it kind of says, well, instead of having second order that has everything blobbed together, I'm kind of dividing the second order into other orders. But this is let's say, an intellectual exercise that I need to dig into and validate. But and then there's a. This is the realm. The third order would be looking into stigmagetic type of behaviors, which is not contained. Well, that can become a first order. Each of it can become the what, or the object that is looked upon. So, and there's a schema from Yol that can be illustrate that. And there's a fourth order that is the emergent outcomes of all these things taken together that actually generates some the evolution of the system. So this is a first attempt, and it's not a theory that I have. It needs to be a bit worked on. But we're here in the domain of linking all kinds of things together. Here we're looking at how the structure. That's basically the domain of the struggle between structure and agency. To be validated, but Yol and Fink, for example, did a kind of more complex way of describing them that I will not get into detail. But if you look at operative, it's relative to the object, the cognitive purpose. It can be relative to what I call the drivers. Then it becomes something that needs to be studied further. Yes, but it was just to show that we can move from one level of analysis to another, of our level of focus to another level of focus, that helps unpack the different level of things that we're looking at. So what are the ways that we can find to unpack these different, which are not perspective, it's not this belief or that belief, it's a different nature. It's a different type of so there are also, that I'd like to look into, J.G. Bennett's Systématique, that has a certain number, like goes up to 12, I think, levels that bring an element of context or an additional view into it, and something I'd like to look at. So let's go now into the cognitive function of the brain, and let's say that look at the pattern, not of the brain, of the pattern. Let's look at pattern as unit of recognition of form and inference. Well, you have Hofstadter, Sanders, that wrote a book, I forgot the name, about. The whole book is about the human ability to make analogies from the childhood to the hunches of scientists. Dyson has a very interesting talk about, is the brain digital or is it analogical? And he concludes that there's a great likeliness that the brain is analogical, but also using digital processes, because language is a type of digital process, because it kind of sequentially, discretely assembles different elements. But the analogy is the unit that is assembled. And Poincaré talks about analogical reasoning, finding hidden similarities and revealing deep identities of structure that come more or less intuitively between disparate concepts and ideas. And there again, it's something that I'd like to dig a little bit more into. So there's Margolis and P-cognition cycles, where patterns are cues, and that trigger another cue and another cue, and then the cue becomes part of the environment. So that's the... And only a few of these cues are seen or are processed. And I'll get into more about that. And so the pattern can be this unit that is involved in many forms of inferences and different moments in the cycle, in the pragmatic cycle, different moments. So this is Peirce's pragmatic cycle, illustrated by John Sowa, who has used it to explain why artificial intelligence has not reached the levels that it could reach, because the tools that are created and the systems of artificial intelligence are all isolated around these types of but nothing tries to integrate them in a continuum that is the continuum of human action. So here, this is a terrible illustration, I've been told, but it's John Boyd's illustration with a few colors to distinguish them. John Boyd was a fighter jet during World War II, and he analyzed something he called situational awareness. Is how come a fighter jet with this huge ton-weighing machine into his hand in a three-dimensional thing at speeds that are totally incredible can manage to observe, orient, decide and act and save his butt, basically, and fulfill his mission. And so it all comes to finding the cues and observing the environment, orienting, because prompting all kinds of different patterns from existing practice, from what you analyze, from previous experience and learning, from your own processing in your mind. So all kinds of different types of prompts that help you decide and act, and the whole thing is fed back into the system. So he notes that orientation shapes observation, that shapes decision, that shapes action, that shapes the whole thing that is fed back. What's interesting is that after he disengaged from the military, he was a consultant for management consultant, and he applied this to other forms of decisions, and so applying it at different paces. So this can be let's say applied automatically once you acquire, like you play the piano, you drive bicycles, the low-level cognition that you acquire these patterns and you do it automatically, but some are more in the realm of planning, analysis, etc. So it's also been illustrated by Senge and Argyris, the ladder of inference. So here you have, and I'm not sure this schema works like this on the cognitive way, but it's a known example. So you have your pool of data and experience observable. So let's say that's reality. And you select data and you add meaning to it. I'm not sure where the meaning, if this is exact, and you make assumptions based on the meaning, and you draw conclusions, and you adapt your beliefs, and you act. So it's not necessarily in this order, but it gives an idea that basically it goes through a filter, and what you come out of the filter is fed back into the system. And so, seen from there, in relation to the pragmatic cycle and inference cycle, interpretation becomes inference from a certain perspective. So, but it's not only about values, beliefs, your opinions, what you think, paradigms, etc. It's also about how you infer and process the data and patterns. So I'm not going to enter into the details of that, but Jung, before it was all put into nice boxes by Myers-Briggs, analyzed the different mental functions and found out, or hunched, or that you had different ways, like a cursor to orient your attention, and then preferences in terms of what and how you perceive, and then where you put your judgment or decision. Is it more in your brain or more in your interaction with the empathy and perceiving and judging? So this means that it's not only about, and we tend to forget this one, or take it a bit like a caricature of oh, what type am I, and but this also plays a role. And a very interesting work of Bernard Stiegler of the IRI, that after the phenomenological work of Husserl, is that cognitive process uses patterns in 3 different forms of retention. So it's another way to look at patterns. So you have the primary retentions that are the cues in the environment, and the ones that are salient and that you capture, because some of them you don't even see, so it can be conscious or not. And the secondary retention is the filter through which you select your cues. I should have put several here. But these patterns that you select, they're the ones that come and enrich your secondary retentions. It's a feedback loop here. And then you have the tertiary retentions, which are actually, once you have your memory and your own mental frameworks, you produce some cultural and some artifacts that delegate your memory and your into the environment. So actually, this is maybe the illustration of how individuation and co-individuation processes patterns in the mind and back into the environment. So we can take one step further and look at human thought or human cognitive processing as a model building activity. And that's been kind of well looked at by people working on artificial intelligence, which I find make it easier for me to understand, because it's actually explained in ways that then they trying to transpose the human understanding and reasoning. And it's simple enough, let's say, to be considered as a so the human mind recognizes, decomposes, recomposes concepts, which are patterns actually, and can make inferences using intuitive physics and intuitive psychology, and construct models of the world and learn in the process. But there are two ways of constructing models, and usually models are constructed as a finished thing, and then we try to fit, things are trying to be fit into the model. But the model-free algorithm and the model-free learning type that is based on actual learning through experience of the mind is that experience is gathered, like we saw in the previous slide, in the form of previously encountered patterns that are used to match our sensory or input from the context at various levels, and that the patterns are matched. And this self-organization of the matching of pattern is the understanding of a situation, and this is what Monica Anderson is working on. She's calling this situation semantics, and she's working on what she calls artificial intuition. And that comes from one of her presentations. And so the context determines what patterns are to be used, and it works with data, but it works also with the mind. Is that reductionism is making scientific intuitions on what can be reduced. The way of doing it without a model is to compare, to match the patterns with what we have in the context, and the more context we can. So it's not about reducing and getting rid of the context, it's about trying to parse the context to find the actual interesting cues to make sense of what we are looking at. And so learning is creating more patterns to match new, previously unseen sensory input, or to make patterns of a higher level. So I don't want to get too much in the detail of that, but it's also something I'm going to get into. And pattern recognition capability is what has helped evolutionary driving force to help our survival, because we needed to spot the patterns of the leopard, or to spot something that may be dangerous or not. Do we know it? It's dangerous, or no, it's not dangerous, and I don't know it, what do I do? So that's when we come into the modeling function, and that can patterns help model the complexity of the world in the same similarly as human thought processes. And this is actually what's being done with pattern language. Christopher Alexander was inspired by the processes of design that vernacular cultures were using without thinking, without needing to transmit any oral or any artifact form, would build something in a kind of archetypal way that had all the qualities that Christopher Alexander called the quality without a name, that can be embodied in different types of shapes and forms. And his point was that you cannot design in one piece something that needs to evolve in an adaptive way. How can you build configuration that bring harmony between two intangibles, a form that you don't know about, and context that you can't really describe? So that's where he was looking into Herbert Simon and looking how complex system can be nearly decomposed into smaller systems of forces that can be graspable by the human mind, and that's where we get connected to the human thought process with a grammatization, meaning discrete way of combining things and probing things at each association in order to build broader patterns. And the way Alexander designed the pattern language was so the fractal nature of the pattern and also patterns that can be involved in different other patterns, so connections and networks of patterns. But it has been used in domain-specific areas for the moment. So how do we get out of these areas? So this type of context adaptive modeling is actually purpose-seeking models where you don't need to define, it's not goal-directed, but you define an ideal. So this is what Alexander called it. That can be a bit more abstract: sustainability, resilience, aliveness, wholeness. So an ideal outcome, and you constantly adapt your action to this goal depending on the cues and what happens in the context. Something akin to agile technology. So Cunningham has invented the wiki. Oh, it's a technology that actually adapts to it's a process of prototyping and adapting the prototype as it is tested and used. So from there we can build context adaptive networks of adaptive solutions if we manage to connect different forms of patterns and to get a grasp of these different dimensions. How long have I been already? Already an hour?
No, yeah, more than an hour.
Okay. So I'll go a bit quicker.
Or, yeah.
So well, then we can use the pattern as a connective building block. We can take hackers' approaches to render configurations, processes, flows, different types of things. We can try and work through systemic isomorphies, identities of structure. We can do experimental design and post hoc, let's say afterwards, data analysis to reconstruct phenomena, and this is something that there has been a feuille de route of the complexity science in France, and they have mentioned the need to be able to do that. Reverse engineering, including algorithms. What's happening in our black boxes, and what are the dynamics that algorithms unleash? So this can help build better systems, and actually that's the goal of global brain at work. and enable intent casting. So this system or this algorithm has the intention of producing this type of effect. Does it do it? Does it not do it? Does it fit the purpose, or does it have other effects? And the pharmacological approach is to say, well, something that is defined as being beneficial is not maybe beneficial if you apply it too much, and there's could be levels where things become dangerous, toxic. So it enables to consider, if we can unpack the different dimensions and know what we're talking about, to do all kinds of things and provide practical tools to work collaboratively to probe quality, systemic trajectories, sustainability, etc. And connect via the modeling relation, so I will not go on this. So pattern as unit of representation of forms, we have all kinds of models of patterns, designs, symbols and rituals, templates, blueprints, repeatable processes. They all have structured forms most of the time, but all these are never related. So Anthony Judge has tried to do some relation and connect Chinese patterns with other ritual patterns and all kinds of different patterns, and it's quite interesting. But one interesting thing to know is that this is the definition of Alexander. Each pattern describes a problem which occurs over and over again. The important here is to say that the pattern has some form of repetitivity, and it's distributed, and it's a rich, versatile object, knowledge object, structure object that can be processed by the mind, by a machine, etc. So how can we make the best of that? As per Alexander, it has an internal reproducible structure, could become a standard, like the wiki became a form of a standard, and the wiki was invented to gather as a repository for patterns of software originally, the guy who invented the wiki. And so connectable now via hyperlinks, but what are other semantic or semiotic web technologies that could link all these, and visualizations that could help connect, and two, navigate among the connected things. So what forms of standard interoperable vehicles could we think of? So that's the form of the Alexander pattern, a bit boring, I will pass that, but it has a structure, you know, the context, the problem, the solution, just if you wanted to have a peep on what the classical pattern of a pattern language is, but I think we are talking about something different here. And last important thing is that as this unit of knowledge, rich, which has its own content, but also can be combined digitally, let's say, it can be used as a shared representation or inference formats where people can kind of confront their perceptions, their representations around this shared object of study. And we can imagine systems to keep track of controversies, and the patterns become, and their associations and sequences become objects of research themselves that can help explore boundaries, crossover, etc. It's a question of opening up the blind areas and joint discovery, the boundary objects, what we know, but others don't know, and what we can discover. And at the end of the day, it's about finding the patterns that connect across dimensions, across boundaries, to connect and navigate spatial, temporal dimensions, complexity and change, and to navigate the adjacent possible for joint discovery, the global brain. So I have quick, maybe we can start the discussion. I have quick orientations of how we can operationalize that. So do you want me to go quick through that, or what time? Huh?
It's 15:22 if about time.
Okay. So what do you want?
I would like to see a basic operationalization.
Okay. Well, which is not a full operationalization, but which is areas that can. Okay, so a few ideas: visual tools, artifacts, connective language, of pictograms, semantic capabilities, formats and protocols, visual tools. But if we look at visual tools, we already have pattern languages that are used in forms of cards. So one card, one pattern, and people can build things. So this is a pattern language to bring life to meetings and gatherings, but there's a whole different types of patterns here. So these are patterns, let's say, of structure or organization. But it's played in interesting ways. You can choose the ones you prefer, or you can dial randomly and build something out of it, or you can compare the ones that you prefer, or all kinds of ways of playing that. And that's also part of a learning. Then there's Stéphane Huron, Samuel Huron, maybe you know him, at INRIA, and he's building visual modelization, visual construction tools. So this is tangible tokens that he uses for budgeting, for example, categories and quantities. And he has been investigating how people construct visual mappings. So each 1, 2, 3, 4, 12 is the different ways people use it, and ABC is create, update, annotate. So that's an example, but what could we do with patterns and using patterns? For example, there's the Lego serious play that uses Lego to build configurations, patterns, strategies built based on metaphors. So what again tools can we? So, and they advertise this as learning to think with one's hands. So how can we apply the pattern to do it kinetically? So another orientation. Who is that? Olivier. So okay, a few people, creating the big picture. What could we do with patterns with more people? How can we collaboratively sketch, test concepts, connect different dimensions? You work on that. And you have Brett Victor, for example, who has found ways to see the image that is produced by his code. So as he is coding or changing variables in his code, he sees the picture transform. Could we imagine things where we have patterns here and simulating the association of different structures, dynamics, to see how it goes in ways that are different than systems dynamic representations that are totally closed, and once it's done, it goes in a cycle, but you can't question every connection. You can't question and say, what if I replace this? You can't have a heuristic approach to systems dynamics. So the big question of unity of science. Will we be able to find the universal patterns, a very short, abstract, thing that can help us model everything? I think not, because of all what I explained about triadic specialized agency that needs to connect. But on the other hand, could we find ways to cluster similar types of forms and connect them through semantic links and navigate them as a cloud, as a cluster, and get people use their preferred ones and discuss about it, and how is this one similar to that one, and how is it different, and how does it happen to mix that one and that one. So here are pictograms. Alexander had 15 fundamental properties. He went away from these patterns where he said the window needs to be close to the door, or feng shui type of thing, and he went more into principles of geometry that are meant in a good proportion to construct alive buildings that are whole and alive, and that generate life. But so the first column is Alexander's pictograms, but then this is architecture agency who did their own set, and this is Takashi Iba, a big guru of the pattern language community, who made their own set, and there's Helmut Leitner, another expert of pattern language, who made their own. So here is a cluster of isomorphic or homomorphic representations that are meant to represent one principle. That's an example. Why do I choose between these representations? Can I discuss which one is the most adapted? So Iba, for example, he now came up with 24 fundamental behavioral properties, and he thinks we can index, and that's the direction I was working on actually too, that we can index patterns with types of pictograms that are that represent smaller units of manipulation, smaller units of processing. So what I had come up with was to have a kind of systemic interpretation grammar where you had different types of systemic operators representing movement, direction, rhythm, time, scale, I mean more mathematical things, and then relationships, etc., and then all kinds of heuristics and inflection points. That was something I did a couple of years ago. And so I scribbled all kinds of little pictograms. So I have 100 different shapes, different forms, so people were saying, hey, but that's not coherent, and what are your categories? I don't care, I have them there, play with them, and scribble your own, and then we can play to put them together, to create categories, etc. And we learn patterns. We learn pattern thinking. So we used this in 2015. People picked all kinds of different ways of doing that, and started and say, well, what does it tell you, and what do you want to express? What can you express of something of your own environment using these? And people were, in the end, one saying, hey, I can tell a systemic story. But one was doing a business model for the launch of a technology product, and another one was describing a leadership problem in a peer-to-peer open organization. Another one was talking about settlement of nomads in the Sinai, and another one was describing another cut, and another with the same types of with the same cards. And we did the same last a month ago at the pattern language of program, which is the software, pattern language of software meeting, and people also were using them in very, very different ways. And we added in here Takashi Iba's patterns of behaviors to have a broader set. Other people are working on, so these are more categories. Other people are working on ways to categorize, or to index, and that's, I think, important. And then you have people in the system sciences who say, let's look at isomorphies. So Len Trunkel, he's been working on isomorphies for a while. So these are all the ways to represent hierarchies, and these are the features of cycles. So these are the things, and here's a way of representing movie animation. So the principles of movement in an animated movie, motion design, that have been done in GIFs. So there are all kinds of things that we can think of. These are the first artifacts that we can actually work with, physically in our hands, test things, but then what can we do with artificial intelligence? What can we do in databases? What can we do with visualization? Voila. I'm done. Yeah, it was longer than I thought, but so what I want to take away is how can we continue to work, and if you have ideas, contact me. And but how does this speak to your activity and your domain of research? Now I let you talk.
Well, I like the idea of general systems theory to say find isomorphies at an abstract level, find structures, patterns, processes that you find again in lots of different places. But the problem I have a little bit with these kind of approaches is that you define patterns in a way that's kind of half abstract, half concrete, where the concrete is typically a visual illustration. And the visual illustration means that it is biased by our visual capabilities and the patterns we tend to know visually, which means that for certain more abstract kind of processes, probably we lack a kind of good visual illustration. So there may be a certain bias there, and there may be a bias to go to shapes that everybody knows, like icons. Icons typically depict things that, like telephones or doors that happen to be just there in a certain society, in a certain technology, and then kind of take on all general
let's call
meanings.
them ideograms then.
Yeah.
But yes, that's sure. So what other forms can we find? Because I've gone to the easy stuff here. Visual, I can show it. I can show them to you, so it speaks to you. I don't know how to represent. That's a hard question.
It reminds me of something of a former PhD student of mine who unfortunately died before he could finish his PhD, Øyvind Vada, a Norwegian, who had a company where he had developed a whole system of cards, and how did he call them? Memes. Yeah, he called them memes, but actually they were kind of similar to your patterns, because each card had kind of an icon and then a basic concept like hierarchy, like cycle, like synergy, like leader-follower. And he gave those cards to the people in his group, and he let them also kind of try to learn and try to understand their company by using some of these patterns. That's in the
Memeto.
Memeto was his company, or Memetics at a certain moment. But his companion, Peter Braven, who worked with him, he's still alive, he's still making a PhD with me. he's not using that exactly.
Still.
You didn't kill him.
No, the problem is those guys started their PhD like about 2003, and so still making a PhD, I mean, it's a person that goes on and goes on. Hopefully he will live long enough to finish it.
Can you send me the link?
Yeah, it's. I can. Just a
Oh,
moment.
no. No, I'll look it. No, but later.
Later.
Oh.
But the question is, can we get those? I think he used to give seminars here, and then each time he gave us one of those things with his patterns on. But then, yeah, we don't have one, and I don't know whether they're still available somewhere, because it might be useful for you to add to your collection of patterns.
Yes.
Because he had developed them over many years, and also changed them, adapted them to see which ones work best, and so on. So it might be a good addition to your selection from IBA and so on.
Yeah, but the question being, how do you foster pattern thinking, pattern representing, pattern finding? I mean, how do you foster the learning and the processing of patterns?
Well,
visual is one. What can we do?
Well, his approach was, he called it memetics, that if you see a particular pattern and you remember it, it's like a meme that from then on becomes an element that you can use to analyze problems, to speak about things, to conceptualize things. And his PhD was supposed to go and test in companies where he had done that exercise, and then go back 5 years later and then see which of the patterns the people would still remember. So which were the good memes and which were the less good memes. So actually he started writing his PhD, and I think there's a draft on there somewhere, but it's quite unfinished. So I put all his stuff on the web, so but on the web none of this pattern stuff is really on there. It's more theoretical articles about memes that he wrote.
An interesting thing that happened when people were manipulating it is that they were more interested and let's say surprised, astonished, happy with the process of discovering that they could do that and that it could help them express things in different ways than the actual set that they were looking at.
Yeah.
And I think this is where we can work, actually, is to try and find, or where I would like to work, to both to the form but also what's the process of the discovery and what's the process of the learning, and what does it bring and what does it generate.
Well, that was what he more wanted to explore in his PhD.
So seeing what he has done would certainly help. But
you have those.
I have it. I already have it. Thank you, Victor.
Maybe they have some videos recording.
Yeah. Peter should know what has happened to that. In the worst case, we can contact his widow.
For me, like the problem you are attacking is super super important, and I completely see the reason. I'm less convinced about the whole idea of pattern language.
Yeah.
Because I don't see much difference between pattern language and language, basically. Except that there is a different medium which is visual. But if that is the difference, then what we are actually saying is that people understand visually better than any other way. Because
I don't think it's just that. I think it's a level of abstraction. A pattern is something that can be seen in many different places, while language typically uses a word to describe either a concrete phenomenon or something vague, abstract, of which you're not quite sure what the pattern or the structure is.
don't know, like,
So in
when
theory, you could have for each of these patterns of words, which is what, for example,
but you
System C would like
but
to
you
do.
do have any concept which is there, it has a word in it, and
Yeah,
it word.
but the
You
word
mean the
often
wordiness
is
of the pattern language?
Yeah.
No,
that
no, I say that like those concepts are named in language. This is why they actually have been selected to be represented in pattern language.
Yes.
If the notion didn't exist as related to that pattern, it wouldn't like be represented in the
Yes,
pattern language.
and the name in there, in the pattern language community, the name is the finding the exact word.
Everything.
Yes, but it doesn't actually, depends on who.
I don't think it's sufficient. I think there are the language is too abstract in the sense that it gives a name, but you don't often know exactly what
I
it
agree.
represents. If it's something concrete, everybody agrees about what a dog is and what a chair is, but what a hierarchy is, what a loop is, that's already less obvious. If you draw it or in some other way formalize it, maybe mathematically or via process or via an animation, you can give it certain clarity that the word alone would not give.
I'm not saying that, I'm absolutely not defending language as like, okay, we have, I'm just saying that the way of representing, the different way, like how much farther it can get,
Yes. Yes,
like,
and
compared to language.
And I've been struggling with
Uh-huh.
the notion of pattern language.
Uh-huh.
And every time I talk about patterns, about connectivity, about networks of patterns, and I can make an analogy with language, but every time, because the framing was pattern language, I kind of fought with myself and struggled to add it back. But I was, and you remember we had these discussions too, and so how do we frame, etc. And I was always thinking that maybe the notion of pattern stands enough on its own, and then it can be used in pattern languages for specific domain-related language, for example, but not as a encompassing, overarching thing. And I think that what's important is to really bring out this potential of the pattern in the mind, in the design, and then what's done with it. There's a whole possibility, I think.
And I completely agree. Like I see it in a similar way that some kind of technology is actually needed, like representational, like for different type of cognitive processing, for us to see things that we are speaking about, like better, or operate like and communicate about them better. But I wouldn't like go to the pattern languages and have kind of representation, because it's like one possible technology. Only one possible. So like it already drags you in some direction, which I think it won't get much farther than language as it is. And simultaneously, I think that there's so much power to visual, aid. Like if we, I sometimes imagine like if we had some kind of a magic powder, just you blow it and you instantly see the interconnections that we are speaking about, how we are thinking, how we are like in a room, like what kind of referencing and patterns exactly are happening right now. You would immediately see what you are doing, right? And sometimes you don't. So kind of visual, dynamic thing.
That's what I was trying to get at with this Brett Victor tree that was being built, and or what you are trying to do with the generative.
So,
but rolling back again, unless there's some comments or questions on visuals or operationalization, but how about the agency thing in connection to what you were talking about, we were talking about earlier? How does it sit and connect with your view of and your work on social systems?
I think it's like what I am interested in this exactly in this agency of the pattern, you know, as socially constructed one, which is the mediator, right? Thing. So here I completely like, you know.
Yeah, you connect with
absolutely. I also wonder about. I know that this phrase pattern that connect, and I think like the connectivity, the issue of connectivity is actually like already problematic in this concept of the pattern, which is which is a thing that it highlights connection and simultaneously shows disconnection. So like it's a differentiation tool as well, you know. So like it's only connecting because it's differentiated from its background.
What about general definition of what is the pattern? Something like for me, it's something that is unexpectedly simple. You know? And it's related to
the
the
kind of a redundancy in the sense that you see many different instances, actually it's the same pattern.
Yeah. And it's coherent with the theory of simplicity of the Sun.
Yes,
and with that kind of definition, you can start doing math on it.
Yeah, which is the facet.
Yeah.
You know, as much as I can take the social science and the sociology and but the math. I mean,
I understand. I have a mathematical background, so my instinct is also to go. I want to see the maths of that. I understand that.
But I'm super interested because I mean I used to be and I used to love math, but I took another track. But I wouldn't be able. I mean, now that I'm kind of disconnected.
It's a lot of work to get back into maths.
There's still, maybe yes.
Maybe. The maths of simplicity theory are unexpectedly simple.
Same stuff.
Yeah. It's not so complicated. So you should make a connection with
people who do math say this all the time. People who do math say this all the time. It's not complicated.
So somebody needs simple. It's physically simple. But I wanted to pick up with another topic, which is an analogy. And the analogy, now we come to the cognitive processes, that is that the mind sees one pattern and then sees a completely different thing. Actually, it's the same pattern. So there is an analogy, but the problem of analogy is it's very difficult to model because, of course, it's not the same. Some things are the same, but the things that are the same are at kind of a high level of abstraction. On the other hand, this abstract pattern is made out of concrete things that are very different. Like, I give a classical example. A city is like an organism, and the sewage pipes of the city are like the intestines that take out the excrements, and the bloodstream is like the roads where the traffic goes, and so on. So you can see this analogy, but you have to already reason at a high level of abstraction. In this case, you can reason at the level of abstraction of living systems theory of James Cleary Miller, which is one of the systems theory which defines a number of subsystems of every system, and you can see that the same subsystems exist in a city and exist in an organism.
Yes, but which may be limited in the sense that the living system is autopoietic and regenerates itself, but the city, does it regenerate itself similarly? So you actually, yes, indeed, never have an identical.
And that is why the question is, is analogy enough to define patterns? Because you see some overlap in structures, but the overlap typically will be different for each analogy. So you can say a city is analogous to an organism, and an organism is analogous to a machine, but the machine is much less analogous to the city, and the city is analogous to an ecosystem, but the ecosystem is again less analogous to the body, and so on. So that's what makes it difficult to abstract a pattern. What von Buitenlandje tries to do is, let's define a number of general properties of systems, which we can find in all of these things, though in some you may have to leave out some subsystems. And James Graham Miller is the one which, in my view, has developed the most detailed scheme, in the sense that he has 20 or 21 subsystems of any so-called living system. While other system series usually have less subsystems, and the ones they have, they are typically more restricted in the sense that they work in one context but not in the other. Well, the ones of James Graham Miller function pretty well, but they are functional subsystems. That means that you can see that there is something in the city that has the function of a memory, but the memory in the city and the memory in an organism will look very different and will be implemented very differently. So you can say the city has a memory in the sense that there are archives of the city, and the brain has a memory, but that memory in the brain is completely different from those archives of the city. But at this very high level, there is an analogy, and so you might say there is a pattern that we call memory, which is a kind of a pattern in time where things are stored for later reusal. But now you're getting at a quite high level of abstraction where systems theory might work, but could you still call it a pattern?
But then maybe analogy or isomorphy, even someone made the remark that it implies or involves too much equivalency, and that maybe metaphor and homomorphy is more accurate, because then you can make distinctions and you don't assume that things are the same. You assume the possibility for distinctions, like a synonym is not an exact mirror of a meaning of one word, but you can navigate.
No problem. So there is the classical view. You have some kind of system with certain kind of structures, and then you have another system that has a very similar structure, except here there are white dots and there are red dots, so they are not the same, but I could map the one onto the other, and so that's an isomorphism.
Yeah.
Now there's a simpler notion of a homomorphism, in which we say this thing actually has small structures which are not mapped to that one, so only part of the structure is mapped to that one. But what you will get in reality is that this one will still have some more things that are not mapped onto that one either. So now we see there is this kind of a substructure that is similar between the two, but here there are other structures that are not mapped. And now I can find a different analogy, and I will find maybe a pattern that is shared by those two, but it's no longer shared with that one. And that's what analogy is. There are always something that are shared and something that are not shared. And then you have to say, yeah, what is now actually the pattern? So here it looks clear that this is the pattern because it's shared by those two, but if I now take a third one, so that's where the pattern language becomes difficult, because you kind of assume that there's a canonic set of patterns that we find in many different systems.
Which is not what I'm assuming, actually. So.
In my opinion, going from one pattern to another, it defines what we can call a story.
Yeah.
And a story may have its own pattern. I think it's a dimension which we should explore.
Yes.
Yeah. For instance, here you lose some points from going from that pattern to the other.
Well, actually, I just read in Scientific American a very nice article where they looked at the evolution of myths. It turns out that some myths are very old, dating from even before the Ice Age, because they found the same myths in Siberia, in Africa, in Greece, in America. But the elements are not all the same. So what they have done is decompose the myth into some myth themes, which are kind of minimal elements, and then try to map how much of these elements are the same between different memes. And like that you can do a little bit like with DNA, you can try to find which are the common ancestors and how long ago two versions of the meat branched and started separating. But then again, yeah, it's a particular combination of these meat themes that forms a story. You need some combination, otherwise you don't have a story. A single element is not a story. But then, yeah, they evolve independently and they overlap in some substructures and they don't overlap in other substructures. And for our brain, we will see there's similarities in patterns, but we can't really say that there are kind of universal patterns that we discover all of them. We already have these elements, and these elements are each time different.
We may explore it to.
Yeah, then it's an exploration exercise.
Yeah, we may try to understand if the natural selection applies to that story, to this myth. And for what reason the one has been selected and the other died, and so on. Why what's in a pattern that may allow it to survive or not, something like that. What's the evolutionary advantage of a pattern?
What I'm trying to do is to go at the highest level of abstraction, to go to concepts like feedback, autopoiesis, self-organization, distinction, connection, network, that are so abstract that you can really find them everywhere. But the question is, can you still call these patterns?
Well, aren't they categories? Because if you don't define the type of feedback, if you don't define the type of structure, then it doesn't qualify your pattern. And I think there's something also that patterns are sometimes used as interchanging with categories, whereas categories encompass many different instances or different types of movement actually, or different things of different shape, whereas could we use the actual shape, or when do we use the actual shape, and when do we use the category?
The problem with shape is that it's something we all know intuitively, but that's because we have a visual intuition about shape, and then when you try to apply to more abstract things, then the notion of shape kind of evaporates. Like, what is still shape?
But isn't that what we try to get to? To learn how to better make sense of shapes, or shapes or stimuli. I mean, shapes, not necessarily shapes, but to make sense of what stimulus we have, and what can I do with this?
Connect shape with stimulus. For me, it's very different things.
Well, a shape is something that you can delineate. I don't know.
Maybe we can speak about topologies.
Yes.
And some aspects of the topology are visible, some are
They
not.
are not. But they're all, yeah.
But they produce some effect.
Yeah. And what
on other sense than the visual side.
The
So-
problem with shapes is we are biased by either two-dimensional or three-dimensional space in which we move. If we want to speak about complex processes, we need more than these dimensions. So what is still a shape if you have something with lots of variables and is the feedback a shape? Yeah, you can draw it like a loop, but that's visual depiction. The feedback is not really a circle. But the feedback is a very common type of process that you will find everywhere if you start looking for it, and which helps you to understand a lot of things.
Loops will certainly also be multidimensional certainly full much more than in our three or two dimensions.
So any question or comments at the back? If
Well, I have a comment concerning artificial intelligence. If you want to have some feedback from the environment, combining reinforcement learning, and in order to know which of the patterns that you have been learning or retaining in your memory will be kept to the next level of memory, actually could actually have an explanation based on the rewards or the credits that you get out of retaining them. And the second point, if you want to put on artificial intelligence, is to find what we call the contextualization tasks, which is a way of labeling actually the data. You know that for this context, retaining that pattern when you that state. So you might have to define contextualization tasks, and it is based on the NLPs that have also the same problem. You can learn from background words, or you can learn out of the sentences put into certain context. And actually, I see there are some analogies, if I can use that word in this context. But I must agree that the notion of pattern language, I tend to agree that it's probably a step ahead. There might be issues which are probably more basic to be studied in the context.
You mentioned sometimes Sanger and the system dynamics approach
yes,
and the archetypes.
yes.
One possible possibility what you do is you manage to find criteria to take this modeling approach for more abstract concepts. Let me say also one thing. Forrester is the founder of this discipline. He died this week.
Oh,
Yes.
Oh. Another one of the big systems theorists that has disappeared.
The problem that I see underneath is the number of dimensions that you need to have a representation. And this is a common issue that you have also related to artificial intelligence, basically. You can have sparse representation and dense representations. The sparse ones are those that are related to they're going to grow the number of dimensions, and they are probably also easily retrievable. The other ones have the dense ones have a nice property that you can find easily similarities between because actually you bundle towards the representation actually a notion about how close they are to the neighbors, to very similar
Yes, but in
presentations.
a dense system, the interpretation is very hard. It's very hard.
Well, this is part of the class of interpretation that we cannot talk about as part of the system, I would say. It is the same thing in NLP. If you can start to analyze, I would say, language by letters, or words, or sentences, or full paragraphs. Actually, the question stands as of what is the best trade-off in terms of what you need to learn versus what is the objective, and I probably go to this objective. What is the objective of learning translation?
For example, I wanted to look into Pierre Lévy's EML. I don't know if anyone is familiar.
Yeah.
Because he started with visual
I think
pictograms,
likes it, but
and he moved to other types of So you are artificial in art. So I mean, do you see some applications? It's a question for.
You need deep thoughts, but
I mean,
you have the boundary also with the processes actually.
Would you be interested to
Yes,
to continue a conversation?
yes. I need first to digest the material because actually you go. It's interesting slides actually, but it's a difficulty that you're presenting the concepts also from the different directions and then come to operation.
Yeah, because it's
operationalization, which is actually the questions then of understanding which operations you need, which one makes sense, and then how to use certain tools of artificial intelligence to articulate them. So it's 3 steps ahead actually about giving you crisp answers about how to do it, what are the possibilities.
Okay, I'd be interested at some point in the future. What is the name?
What do you think?
Okay.
Working in Bell Labs.
Bell Labs?
We are actually in neural systems basically, so learning about artificial intelligence and neural systems.
Okay.
But actually you have a specific context or you can do the contribution.
I've been trying to. I don't know if Monica Anderson is known in this.
I know many understands, right?
Yeah, she's no, but she was working with Google, and I mean she's done very interesting work on that borders. I mean that could be, and that's what kind of also oriented me to want to dig a little bit more in these directions. And you are Cadet?
Yeah.
Oh, hello.
How's it going?
I was like, is it him?
You have eliminated everybody, then you decided he must be Cadet.
No, but I saw your picture.
You saw my on the website.
I saw your picture, and then I saw, okay, so he doesn't seem to say hi, or no, it must be someone else. Okay, so it's you. Okay. So do you have any comments, or? I mean, I don't want to fish for comments, but.
Yeah,
but I do actually.
Sorry? Yeah.
No, but if we can have a conversation later on. Okay. Victoras, yes, you didn't say anything.
Yes, I do not want to.
What are you going to provoke and?
You said in one place that like you would like to see, and everybody is thinking in terms of contexts, concrete contexts and concrete situations. So how can we lift everything, like these patterns or pattern languages, from these situations? And I don't. Let's say even what you presented as operational way to do it is with these pictures, but actually they are applicable only in certain concrete situations. So as such, it's sort of non-liftable from this like specifics. It's just a way to create stories. What Olivia said. To create stories and to see how they may be.
But can't you lift if you make clusters of things that people cluster, connect together, can you lift? Can't you lift in a certain way? I mean, don't you have generative algorithm or ways to?
It is actually one of the research questions that was actually finding a universal training algorithm for certain classes of
and this
problems that you have is not easy hard. So you won't find a universal algorithm to solve all your tasks. They might require lots of information, even sometimes crossing the environmental boundary doesn't provide you sufficient insight to do it.
Okay.
So.
But then you don't want to mimic human computation.
Yeah,
You want humans to
Let me
compute.
try to understand first
Yeah.
whether it is how far you can go and what are the
Yeah,
conclusions
exactly.
you have.
And how can you help the best? I mean, make the best of artificial intelligence to assist human computation. But you need the learning to take place. Otherwise,
But it is something that we said at the beginning. You have analog views about what is computationally feasible, and you have digital views. And actually, depending on the classes of artificial neural networks abstraction you would be considering, you may reach certain capabilities or superhuman capabilities. But it's a very, what I'm trying to say is that it's very far away from having actually these universal tools from being usable everywhere, from places.
Yes.
It's still in the research phases too.
This field of machine learning is relatively knowledge which
yes. And I'm pretty sure that the Googles and Facebooks, they have loads of stuff that could help behind the walls.
The problem of these machine learning algorithms is that they are not transparent. That means they will learn patterns, but they can't explain you what the patterns are. They are extremely dense networks of associations, and they give you the right results. If you ask them a question, they might tell you this is a dog, but what characterizes a dog as a visual pattern, they can't tell you.
Yeah, but then they can present you with data saying, they can present maybe data saying in this type of, problem database or solution database or whatnot, behavior database, this could be a dog and this also could be a dog, even if it looks like a donkey.
Yeah, but the problem is that they don't make abstraction. It's the idea of neural networks. That means you have lots of nodes that are connected by links, and those links become stronger or weaker depending on the result. So you show them lots of dogs. Each time they give the right answer, you reinforce the one at the top. That activation spreads to the others, and different things get strengthened, others get weakened. And if you do that many, many times, you get a network of associations that are stronger and weaker, and that usually give you the right result. But you can't say where in that network is the pattern.
And then you can even have confirmation bias of your learning algorithm then, in a certain way.
But there's this aspect of patterns that we are really good in processing patterns, excellent in processing patterns. And another problem that you identify.
When you say we, is the human.
Yes. Like in general, like biological organisms, right? And then I would focus on this differentiation, that we are excellent in patterns and we have problems with patterns. And to define what kind of problems with patterns we have and operationalize precisely this problem for AI would make a good use of AI, because AI mimicking us is just like, okay, there's plenty of people at this planet, so like, why do we need more, But
what do you mean by problems with patterns?
What is the cognitive problem that humans have with patterns that you want to solve, The problem is not that we do recognize patterns, because it's a known problem, right? So like, what problem do we have, and what do we want to solve?
I think the problem is that we often don't see patterns in complex systems because they are too complex. It doesn't mean that there are no patterns in there, but they are hidden among the complexity.
And is it this kind of problem you want to solve? Because like
well, there's this, which is the object, the yellow part, but there's also how do you connect the rest. So how do you talk about patterns when you don't speak the same language, and how do you represent patterns that can be interpreted in different ways? And I think we need to see it as a whole.
I would, like operationalize, like grasp the precise, like one problem that is like maybe central, because like then there are many problems with patterns, you know, like not seeing patterns, not being able to communicate. Like what?
Yeah, an example, a case study.
Or a concept that would like pinpoint exactly the problem at the center.
No, but I see the attraction of a pattern language in the sense that it would allow people to more easily describe a complex system by recognizing specific patterns in it and be able to communicate about it and maybe to rearrange those patterns and like that maybe solve problems. So I think that is basically what she wants to do. So I think it is useful to think of a pattern language. I just don't think we are ready at the moment to have a universal pattern language. So we will have lots of different pattern languages that overlap in some respects, are different in other respects. And if it is like a natural language, maybe after a while there will be some kind of consolidation in the sense that some patterns would become so often used because the people like them that they would become kind of a common vocabulary. At the moment we don't have that common vocabulary.
But is it, do we want to create the container or the word or the equivalent of the word, of the unit, or do we want to create the capability of recognizing, associating, exchanging, confronting these units and these patterns? And I think this is what in the social, in the change and in the social transformation type of intervention that we want to do, I think this is what we need to work on. So maybe the emergent result of this will be that in the end people will come up with the universal patterns because they will acquire some form of pattern literacy and acquire some learning of distinguishing, just like the actual, you know, when you learn to be a virtuose musician, you don't need to think where you put your fingers or what. So if you learn to like Monsieur Jourdain, patterns and you use them all the time, then you become more competent. And as you become more competent, so this is what I'd like to maybe initiate, is the awareness that the pattern can be mis en scène, can be used, can be put to work in different types of environments, for different types of functions, and that we need to acquire a habit. We talk about habits of mind, acquire a habit of processing patterns. And then from there, maybe have objectives, and the global brain will process and create the theories and tools, etc., to process it in a certain direction, and others will learn how to will process in another direction.
Well, the processing could be compared, if you speak about languages, with the syntax. Like you have the words, and then you can put the words together in certain patterns of patterns, in certain combinations that express more and that allow you to make much more complex descriptions than, like it's like this factor ID. You can embed patterns within patterns and like that build up. Like a building that can be a combination of different patterns at different levels. So that's kind of your syntax, your grammar. You combine the vocabulary of patterns into higher order patterns.
But maybe in the beginning you don't need to be able to create a sentence that has a meaning. Maybe you can do like kids and balbutie, that start to compose patterns that maybe don't create something that is, you know, fail-proof.
I mean, your patterns don't need immediately to be the best ones, but if you can already start creating patterns, you can explore the space of possible patterns
and then
find
you learn
the
how
ones that maybe work best.
I'd like to expand a little bit on this situation thing that I said, that maybe it's not liftable from the station, meaning that what Francis said in this, or drew in this picture, is that for anything that you find in the world or whatever, you can find similarities and you can find differences.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you find similarities or whether you find differences, and you can find different patterns that kind of connect different
Mm-hmm.
things. So it needs to be a purpose in why are you doing that. So meaning it needs to be a situation in order for the pattern to emerge. And so for me, let's say the interesting question would be with relation to artificial intelligence is how do you figure out what's the kind of this mechanism of this pattern for this pattern to emerge. And I don't think that it's enough to have a huge vocabulary of predefined patterns and to sort of put them on the situation and to see whether they fit or not. So yeah, that is what I meant.
Mm-hmm. You mean you don't necessarily need to have a complete...
So the way I would go a little bit extreme, meaning that I would start from nothing.
Mm-hmm.
How do they emerge? This is the first question. Not what kind of patterns are there. But then,
Yes, but I agree totally with you. I agree, and I'm because what I'm showing is a direction. It's not that I'm kind of trying to define patterns. I'm saying, well, if people don't know what patterns are and how to use pattern and what they could do with it, let's invent games. Like, you know, kids, when they learn how to speak, they go a b b b a thing and they construct words, and I don't know, but it's this process to say, well, you know, if the notion of pattern is so abstract and not graspable, then let's try and think of ways that people can use little things and cues to kind of grasp what a pattern could be, but it doesn't mean let's together build the patterns that. So it's let's take a habit of using patterns to tell a story. Let's have a habit of using patterns or of looking for patterns. Well, we get the help of these little sets here, but that's another little set, and that's another little set. And what do you want to pick, you know, just as a boundary object to start conversations on the... So, but how do they emerge indeed? But what do you mean by how do they emerge? Because they're there. So how do they emerge to consciousness?
They're not there.
No, but how do they emerge in there? I mean, it's not that they emerge in reality, but how do they emerge in people's minds?
Yes.
As a...
But don't they emerge in reality?
Consciously, I don't know.
Or unconsciously.
Or unconsciously, yeah, exactly.
You mean the patterns emerge in your consciousness?
I think so, because you have... I think that the whole vernacular thing and interest of Christopher Alexander is that he's saying that patterns emerge unconsciously, and patterns are processed, and this is the OODA loop, etc. Patterns are processed unconsciously. How do we make them explicit so we can prompt them? Maybe not more consciously, but how can we get our unconscious to generate more of them, and to get proficient at you know, it's almost like working on lower level cognition here. You know, it has to do with intuition. It's almost how do you train intuition in a certain way? I don't know. I'm thinking as on this level, I think...
That's the whole idea of symbolization. You exteriorize part of your understanding, and by exteriorizing it, you get more control of it, you can manipulate it, you can combine patterns. If patterns are just things which subconsciously you grasp, you can't really do anything with them, you can just recognize them.
Yeah.
Well, if you can exteriorize them and say, if now I combine this pattern with this pattern,
Yes.
following this scheme, then I get this new structure that I had never thought of before.
And I think that and this is what I'd like to study and dig a little bit into more, because it's the whole what we hear about indigenous people that have some mental capacities of you know, we hear about skills that are immanent skills that are lost because we kind of shut down all kinds of things. There's lots on this. How can we, by manipulating it and making it externalized, how can we regain this internal capacity? That's the idea, and I don't know if I formulate it well, but I think that was the point of Christopher Alexander, actually.
So you think that these patterns were appreciated more by, let's say, less civilized people, less Western people? Or?
Well, he was looking at how indigenous people were building, and building
without plans or blueprints.
Exactly.
But with an intuitive understanding
with an intuitive idea of quality of the building that has some constants and invariance.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, I was quite interested at a time of my life where I was living in Indonesia, and I was looking at where because I was surprised that Indonesia has lots of ethnies and things that are very distinct, but that you found shapes in the construction that were really, really like pilotis, and the roofs like this, and all kinds of things like that. And I thought, well, maybe it's because, you know, they were traveling between islands. And then I read something that showed how from somewhere in the south of China all the way to down in the Easter Islands, etc., they were building the same type of structures.
Because actually it's the same people that started in the south of China and that spread over the whole Indian and Pacific Ocean.
That's
up
what
to Madagascar on the
yes,
one side.
well, that's what I ended up.
Yeah.
That's what I ended up finding out. But the question is that they were disseminating, and but they still kept their vernacular way and didn't change. I mean, it's not like so there was some archetypal things that were, and I think there were some analogies or some similarities that were found among other types. So he was referring to that, and so how can you externalize this? And he was saying, I have some verbatim here, that people would learn how to manipulate these just like a language and without thinking about it.
But it's exactly the problem that you might see in many artificial intelligence, because actually you want to join together common sense activities with what artificial intelligence is good at.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not necessarily something which is exploited nowadays. If you look at the utilization we do with artificial intelligence, it is actually very good at certain class of tasks. Like if you would compare an AlphaGo player, for instance, or a chess player 20 years ago, but actually joining this with a common sense reasoning or a common sense as well as logic is something which is extremely difficult. And I believe actually that all what you explained has a common sense sort of reasoning. And blending this might be something we're looking at, because purely artificial intelligence has a lot of work in terms of pattern recognition, pattern exploitation, sampling. And actually, with what you explained, I don't necessarily see all the techniques being in place in order to realize the cause.
What Monica Anderson explains is the difference between reasoning and understanding. And she puts understanding as lower level cognition, that is something that is acquired almost automatically by learning. And she says this is what is is kind of acquired and processed or I can't find the right word, but by intuition, that happens by experience, repetition, intuition, manipulation, the inference actually, which is different from reasoning, which is taking a step-by-step, more conscious way of doing things. And she says that the big error of artificial intelligence is to try to mimic the logic reasoning of the human, whereas much progress can be done in this understanding things, which is getting some form of a ownership of some reflex or some automatism.
But that's where AI has made the biggest progress.
Yes, exactly.
Deep learning.
Yes, and this is one of the aspects, but she's putting the whole faith, let's say, her whole work and faith on the model-free algorithm, and she's working specifically on artificial intuition. There's the link in the presentation.
I should read probably the paper, but I don't. If you look at the way deep reinforcement learning has made its latest advances, probably people have heard about in AlphaGo. This AlphaGo player, it's model driven. Even if they don't learn the model necessarily, they are relying heavily on models. Just the value function is a way of modeling actually how you will direct your decisions based on what you have been learning from what the other player has been doing. So when they speak about model free, well, we probably should read the paper to interact, because we have to understand what they actually mean by putting a model-free artificial intelligence system in place, because I don't necessarily get it completely.
What paper are you referring to?
The paper that you say, she says probably should have a paper or a reference that
yes,
you can
she
read.
has a video, she explains it, and there's
video.
a couple of papers that I reference here. But yes, I don't know enough to... and I can't, actually, that's my problem, is that I can't judge whether when you talk about model free, is it really model free, or is there still a little bit... I can't really I can't really judge about that.
Maybe we should go and have a beer.
Thank you.